Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with yours truly. Today we're taking a look at something that's all around us, but that we probably don't think too much about.
And that is nudges.
Yes, nudges.
Yeah,
They're these little pushes from behavioral economics that can have a surprisingly big impact on the choices we make.
exactly. And today we're going to unpack how these nudges work, especially when it comes to complex systems like healthcare retirement planning,
Ooh, yeah, retirement planning.
even organ donation.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Mhm.
What exactly is a nudge? I mean, it sounds kind of sneaky.
Well, it's not about tricking people or anything like that. It's more about understanding how our brains work
Okay.
and then designing systems that make it easier for us to make choices that are good for us.
So like, instead of forcing people to make a decision?
You kind of gently guide them in the right direction.
Interesting.
Think of it like this. You're walking into a grocery store and you're bombarded with choices,
Oh,
right?
yeah, for sure.
But the placement of items, the lighting, even the smell of freshly baked bread, all these things are carefully designed to influence your buying decisions.
So even something as simple as the layout of a grocery store can be a nudge.
Absolutely. It's all about choice architecture. The idea that the way choices are presented
Okay, choice architecture. I like that.
can dramatically affect the decisions we make.
So it's not just about what choices we have.
It's also about how those choices are presented to us.
Got it. So how does this all play out in more complex areas of life, like choosing a retirement plan?
Well, that's a great example, actually. Sweden did something really interesting with their social security system back in the day.
Okay, Sweden, tell me more.
They decided to privatize it and give people hundreds of funds to choose from.
Wow, hundreds. That's a lot of choices.
The idea was that more choice is always better, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But they quickly realized that people were overwhelmed.
I can imagine.
It's like trying to pick a movie on Netflix when you have thousands of options, you end up just scrolling forever.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
People were sticking with what they knew, picking funds based on advertising, or just defaulting to whatever was easiest.
So not necessarily what was best for their long-term financial goals.
Exactly, and that's when they realized the power of a well-designed default option.
A default option, so like a pre-selected choice.
Yes, they created a default fund that was low-cost diversified and designed to outperform actively chosen portfolios.
So instead of forcing people to make a complex decision, they provided a smart default that most people would be better off with.
Precisely, and it worked. The default fund consistently outperformed the actively chosen portfolios.
Wow, so sometimes less choice can actually lead to better outcomes.
Absolutely, especially when people are dealing with complex topics they might not fully understand.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about something like the U.S. Medicare Part D prescription drug program?
Ah, yes, that's a classic example of what not to do.
What happened there?
Well, they wanted to give seniors more options for their prescription drug coverage, but they ended up with this massive menu of plans.
And I'm guessing that didn't go so well?
It was a disaster. People were completely lost. Doctors were frustrated.
I bet.
And it ended up costing everyone more money because people were often enrolled in plans that didn't actually meet their needs.
So sometimes more choice isn't always better.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot between giving people enough options, but not overwhelming them.
So how do we do that?
Well, one promising approach is what the state of Maine did with their Medicare Part D program.
Maine, what'd they do?
They implemented something called intelligent assignment.
Intelligent assignment sounds intriguing.
Instead of randomly assigning people to default plans,
Okay.
they used people's prescription histories to match them to the most suitable and cost-effective plans.
So they personalize the defaults based on individual needs.
Exactly. It's like those music streaming services that recommend songs based on your listening history.
Right.
Only in this case, it's prescription drugs.
Did it work?
It did. Intelligent assignment led to improved drug access and cost savings for the state.
That's amazing. So instead of just giving people a ton of choices and hoping for the best Maine, use data to actually guide them toward options that were more likely to meet their needs.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how we can use data to design choice architecture that truly benefits people.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
I'm already starting to see the world in a whole new way.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I can't wait to dive even deeper. Stay tuned, folks, because in part 2, we're going to explore how nudges can be used to tackle some even bigger challenges, like
increasing organ donation rates
ooh, yeah, that's a big one.
and even protecting the environment.
Okay, I'm hooked. See you next time for part 2. All right, welcome back, everyone, for part 2 of our deep dive into nudges. Last time we talked about how these little nudges can influence some pretty important decisions.
Like which retirement fund to choose or which Medicare Part D plan is right for you.
Yeah, and it turns out that these nudges can be used for a lot more than just financial decisions.
That's right. We can apply these same principles to things like organ donation or even protecting the environment.
Okay, so let's start with organ donation.
Yeah.
It's a topic where the demand for organs far outweighs the supply. How can nudges help close that gap?
Well, one of the most effective nudges in this area is something called presumed consent.
Presumed consent. Now that sounds a little intense.
It is, but it's also incredibly effective. Basically, it means that you're automatically considered an organ donor unless you specifically choose not to be.
So it's kind of like flipping the default setting.
Exactly. Instead of having to opt in, you have to opt out.
Hmm. Interesting. And how well does that actually work?
Well, a study found that in countries with presumed consent, the organ donation consent rate was 82%,
Wow, 82%? That's huge.
compared to just 42% in countries with explicit consent.
That's a massive difference.
Yeah.
So why is presumed consent so much more effective?
Well, think about it. Most people support organ donation in principle, but they just don't get around to signing up.
Yeah, life gets in the way or they just forget.
Exactly, and that's where presumed consent comes in. It leverages people's natural inertia and makes it easier for them to do what they probably already intended to do.
It's like pre-selecting the donate to charity box on an online order form.
Precisely, most people won't uncheck it because it's already there.
Okay. But I can see how some people might feel uncomfortable with the idea of presumed consent.
Oh, absolutely. It's a complex issue with ethical considerations, for sure.
So are there any alternative approaches that address those concerns while still encouraging organ donation?
There are. One option is something called mandated choice.
Mandated choice. So you're required to make a decision one way or another.
That's right. When you renew your driver's license, for example, you're asked to explicitly state whether or not you want to be an organ donor.
So you can't just ignore the question.
Exactly. And Illinois implemented this system with some promising early results.
It's like those software update prompts that keep popping up until you finally click yes or no.
Haha, exactly. You can't just avoid it forever.
This is all really fascinating. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about school choice. This is another area where nudges can have a big impact.
Absolutely. School choice is all about giving parents more options for their children's education.
Right. But sometimes too many choices can be overwhelming, especially for parents who might not have the time or resources to navigate a complex system.
Exactly. And that's where nudges can help. Remember that program in Charlotte, North Carolina, where researchers found that simply giving parents a clear and concise fact sheet about school performance
Yeah, remember that?
significantly improved their school choices?
So instead of being bombarded with information.
They had a simple tool that highlighted the key factors they needed to consider.
And it worked?
It did. Parents who received the fact sheet were more likely to choose schools with higher test scores and better graduation rates, particularly those parents from lower income backgrounds.
That's amazing. So a simple nudge can actually help level the playing field and empower parents to make more informed choices.
Exactly, and it's a great example of how nudges can be used to promote equity and access in education.
Okay, so we've talked about organ donation and school choice. Now let's tackle something even more controversial: healthcare liability.
This is a hot topic for sure.
I know, and it's an area where emotions run high. But from a choice architecture perspective, one of the key questions is whether patients should be given more control over their legal rights when it comes to medical care.
Right now, the system essentially forces everyone to buy the right to sue their doctor, whether they want it or not.
And that drives up the cost of healthcare for everyone.
So what if patients were given the option to waive their right to sue in exchange for lower healthcare costs?
Whoa, now that's a radical idea.
It is, but it's worth exploring. Remember, choice architecture is all about giving people more agency, not less.
So in this case, it would be about empowering patients to make an informed decision about the level of legal protection they want.
Rather than having that decision made for them by the system.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So instead of having the right to sue, automatically baked into the cost of healthcare,
Patients could choose to opt out of that, right?
and potentially save money on their medical bills.
Exactly. And for those who are concerned about being left without recourse in case of negligence, there could be options to purchase separate disability or injury insurance that would cover them in those situations.
It's like choosing between different levels of insurance coverage for your car or your home.
That's a great analogy. You get to decide how much risk you're willing to take on.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking.
Mm-hmm.
But before we move on, I have to ask about this idea of privatizing marriage that you mentioned last time.
Ah, yes. That one tends to raise some eyebrows.
Yeah, my jaw kind of dropped when you first mentioned it. So can you explain what exactly that would entail?
Well, it starts by recognizing that marriage, as it currently exists, is essentially a government-sanctioned institution with a specific set of legal and financial benefits attached to it.
Right. And that system has led to a lot of debate, especially when it comes to same-sex marriage and the rights of religious institutions to define marriage according to their own beliefs.
Exactly. The idea behind privatizing marriage is to separate the legal aspects from the religious and social aspects.
So the state would essentially get out of the business of defining marriage.
That's right, no more government-issued marriage licenses.
Whoa. Okay, so what happens to the word marriage then?
It would be left to religious and private institutions to define partitions. Couples would be free to enter into whatever kind of marriage ceremony they choose.
Whether it's a traditional religious ceremony or a more modern secular commitment ceremony.
Exactly. But the legal and financial benefits of marriage would be provided through civil unions,
Civil union, so anyone could enter into a civil union.
regardless of their gender or sexual orientation.
That's an interesting concept. So you could have a legal civil union that provides all the legal and financial benefits.
And then you could choose to have a religious or private marriage ceremony on top of that.
Based on your own personal beliefs and values.
Precisely. It's about maximizing individual freedom and choice while ensuring equal treatment under the law.
I see, but wouldn't that create a two-tiered system?
Where some people have marriages recognized by their religious communities but not by the state, that's a valid concern and one of the key critiques of this approach.
It's definitely a complex issue with no easy answers. But it's fascinating to see how choice architecture can be applied to even the most fundamental social institutions.
It really makes you think about how we can design systems that better align with individual preferences and values.
This has been an incredible journey so far. We've covered so much ground.
And we're not done yet. In part 3, we're going to zoom out even further and explore how choice architecture can be used to address some of the biggest challenges facing society as a whole.
Okay, I can't wait to hear more about that. Stay tuned, folks, because it's going to be epic. All right, welcome back, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive into nudges. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from retirement planning to organ donation to even the idea of privatizing marriage.
And now we're going to zoom out even further and look at how these nudges can be used to address some of the biggest challenges facing society.
Okay, so we're talking big picture stuff now, like climate change and social inequality.
Exactly. Those are the kinds of issues where nudges can have a real impact.
So how do we nudge the world in a more sustainable and equitable direction?
Well, let's start with the environment. Remember that idea of information disclosure we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the toxic release inventory, where companies have to publicly report their pollution.
Right, and it turns out that transparency can be a powerful motivator.
Nobody wants to be known as the polluter.
So imagine if we had something similar for climate change.
Like a greenhouse gas inventory for every major company.
Exactly. Everyone would be able to see who's doing their part to reduce emissions and who's not.
So it'd be like a giant scoreboard for climate action.
And that kind of public pressure could lead to real change.
Consumers could make more informed choices. Investors could put their money where their values are.
Even governments could use this information to shape policy.
It's like using market forces to drive sustainability.
Exactly. And it's not just about information disclosure. Remember that example of the device that glows red when your energy use is high.
Oh yeah, that's a great example of real-time feedback.
Now imagine if that kind of feedback was built into all sorts of everyday products.
Like what?
Your car could give you a green light when you're driving fuel efficiently.
Or your grocery store app could highlight the most sustainable food choices.
Exactly. You'd be constantly getting these little nudges to make better choices for the environment.
Without even really thinking about
You
it.
just become second nature.
That's pretty cool. Now, what about social equity? How can nudges help create a more just and equitable world?
Well, one area where nudges have shown a lot of promise is in education.
Okay, so we're talking about things like college enrollment.
Exactly. We know that students from low-income backgrounds often face a lot of barriers when it comes to going to college.
They might not have the same resources or support as their wealthier peers.
Right. So how can we nudge them towards success?
What about simplifying the financial aid process?
That's a great one. Make it easier for students to understand and access the financial aid they're eligible for.
And what about providing more personalized guidance?
Absolutely. Helps students figure out which colleges are a good fit for them and how to navigate the application process.
It's like having a personal coach in your corner,
And we can even use nudges to automatically enroll students in support programs.
so they don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get the help they need.
Exactly. And sometimes the simplest nudges can be the most effective.
like that program in San Marcos, Texas, where they made completing a community college application a high school graduation requirement,
That one small change led to a big increase in college enrollment.
especially among Latino students.
It's amazing how much of a difference a well-placed nudge can make.
This has been an eye-opening conversation. I'm starting to see nudges everywhere now.
They're all around us, shaping our choices in ways we often don't even realize.
And now that we're aware of them, we can start to use them for good.
To nudge the world in a more sustainable, equitable, and fulfilling direction.
So it's not about controlling people's choices.
It's about empowering them to make choices that are good for themselves and for society.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. And remember, the power to nudge is in your hands, too.
Use it wisely.
Until next time, keep those minds open and those nudges coming.